Chapter 13. Hunter's Point did not announce itself. There were no signs welcoming anyone in, no cafes spilling light onto sidewalks, no crowds moving with purpose. It existed in fractured stretches of cracked pavement, abandoned industrial lots, quiet residential blocks that felt deliberately forgotten. Even the water along the shore seemed reluctant to move, thick and dark, carrying the weight of the city's discarded past. Alexander felt it the moment he crossed into the area. The streets narrowed right in front of him. His phone lost signal twice. The GPS recalculated, then rerouted him down a road that looked unfinished, as if construction had simply stopped one day and never resumed. Warehouses loomed on either side, their windows boarded, their metal doors rusted shut. The silence here wasn't peaceful, it was observant. He parked where the address on Sarah's card led him, a squat concrete building with no signage, tucked between a derelict loading dock and a chain-link fence topped with coils of wire. There was no light, no visible entrance, at least not from the front. It was the place designed not to exist, to be abandoned. Alexander checked the card again. No name, no number. Just an apartment designation that felt deliberately misleading. Whoever had arranged this wanted deniability layered upon deniability. He stepped out of the car. The air smelled of salt, oil, and something faintly chemical. Somewhere in the distance, metal clanged, a loose sheet shifting in the wind, or something heavier. He resisted the urge to look over his shoulder. If he had been followed, he wouldn't see it. That much he already understood. Inside, the space was dim but not empty. A single long table occupied the center of the room, illuminated by a hanging industrial bulb. The rest dissolved into the corners swallowed by darkness, exits obscured. It wasn't a trap exactly, but it wasn't safe either. Sarah was already seated. She looked composed, almost serene, dressed in soft neutrals that made her blend into the gloom rather than stand out. Beside her sat a man who did the opposite. He was large, broad shoulders stretching the seams of his coat, neck thick, posture relaxed that suggested violence wasn't something he needed to prepare for. His hands rested flat on the table, scarred, heavy, deliberate. He didn't glance up when Alexander entered. Sarah did. "You made it," she said, smiling as if this were a scheduled lunch rather than a negotiation that could ruin lives. Alexander remained standing. "You chose a difficult place to reach." She tilted her head. "That was intentional." The man finally looked at him then. His eyes were dark, assessing, uninterested in conversation. He said nothing. Alexander sat. For a moment none of them spoke. The bulb hung softly above them. "I know this hasn't been easy," Sarah began, her voice low, soothing. "Choosing between principles and blood never is." Alexander laughed once bitterly. "Don't pretend this is empathy." "I don't have to pretend," she replied calmly. "I understand exactly what you're facing." He leaned forward. "Then you understand I don't trust you," she smiled. "Of course you don't." The man beside her shifted slightly. Sarah folded her hands. "But you came anyway." "That tells me everything." Alexandra's jaw tightened. "I'm here to set conditions." "Good," she said. "I like men who still believe they have them." There was a moment's silence again, thicker now. "I'll give you the Lumiere data," Alexander said flatly. "All of it, the architecture, the raw structures, the access points. But before anything changes hands, I meet my son." The man's gaze sharpened. Sarah didn't react immediately. She studied Alexander for a long moment as if measuring something invisible. Then she nodded. "That's reasonable," she said. "We expected as much." Alexander blinked. "You're not the first man to arrive here believing he has nothing left," she replied. "You're just the first who still remembers what he's fighting for." She leaned closer. "We'll need time. Locating him isn't complicated, but arranging a meeting without exposure requires precision. You don't want mistakes. There are layers to this, Alexander. People, roots, documents that don't officially exist. Movements that won't register in any system you recognize." She spoke with unsettling calm, outlining fragments rather than a whole, mentions of intermediaries, safe transit. Identities that could be borrowed for a few hours and discarded just as easily. Nothing sounded illegal in isolation, yet everything together told of an architecture of disappearance. "You will not be told where he's been kept," she added gently. "Only where you will see him." Fewer facts mean fewer vulnerabilities. Her eyes flicked briefly towards the man beside her, who remained silent, immovable, as if he himself were one of those layers, present but never acknowledged. Alexander listened, jaw tight, absorbing the implication behind every careful omission. This was not a rescue plan, it was a controlled release, timed and choreographed down to his breathing. Sarah leaned forward again. The faintest smile crossed her lips, not unkind but unmistakably assured. Once that happens, we proceed. Cleanly and efficiently. She rose then, signaling the end of the conversation, as if the outcome were already sealed. Alexander stood as well, the weight of it pressing into his chest, knowing that every step from this moment on would be watched, measured, and remembered. As he turned to leave, Sarah's voice followed him, soft and final. Trust is no longer the question, timing is. Her smile returned, small and sharp. We're very patient people. When Alexander left, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street. The silence felt louder now. Across from his car, a black sedan idled near the curb. It wasn't parked sloppily or aggressively. It sat exactly where it wouldn't draw attention. Inside were three men, still and watching, their faces indistinct behind tinted glass. Alexandra's stomach tightened. He drove away slowly, resisting the urge to accelerate, to glance into the mirror too often. The car didn't follow. Just after dusk, as the streetlights flickered on and the neighborhood settled into its usual stillness, a dark sedan eased into a spot across from his house. It didn't idle conspicuously or creep forward, it parked with the confidence of something that belonged there. Countless hours passed just like that. By the time Alexander went to bed, it was still there, a shape he could feel more than see. When he woke before dawn and checked again, the space was empty, leaving behind only the unsettling knowledge that someone had chosen to wait. The following evening, it was a different car, matte gray, windows tinted too deeply to reflect the street. It arrived earlier this time, before full dark, as if whoever was watching had grown less patient. The third night, a black crossover appeared briefly, left, then returned, testing angles, sight lines, routines. Each vehicle was different, deliberately so, but the behavior remained consistent. Alexander began to notice how the neighbors seemed untouched by it all, how ordinary the street looked despite the slow tightening of something unseen. He stopped standing near the windows, he stopped turning on lights unnecessarily, the silence felt curated, at work the shift was more invasive. By midweek, his head chief finally called him in. The office looked the same as it always had, tidy desk, half-closed blinds, the faint hum of the air conditioner, but the familiarity only sharpened Alexandra's awareness of what didn't belong. His boss didn't ask him to sit right away. He leaned against the edge of the desk instead, arms crossed loosely, posture casual enough to seem unplanned. "Everything all right on your end?" he asked, tone light, almost conversational. "You've seemed distracted lately." Alexander chose his words carefully. He said work had been busy, that he had been dealing with some personal things. His boss shook, as if that answer fit neatly into a box he had already prepared. Then came the follow-up questions, soft, imprecise, but persistent. Had Alexander been traveling recently? Had anyone unusual tried to contact him? Was there anything going on that might affect his clearance, his availability, his focus? Each question was put out as a concern, never suspicion, but Alexander felt the shape of something larger forming beneath them. "I'm asking because," his boss added after a pause that lasted just a second too long, "sometimes things don't stay personal, and when they don't, it helps to know early." He smiled then, a practiced expression meant to reassure, but it landed poorly. Alexander acquiesced, kept his face neutral, offered nothing beyond what was necessary. He promised there was nothing to report. As he left the office, he understood something clearly now. His boss didn't know what was happening, but someone had made sure the question was asked. He pressed his forehead against the glass, heart pounding, and understood something with devastating clarity. Whatever he chose next wouldn't be about right or wrong anymore. It would be about who reached him first. By the time Alexander left the building, the realization had settled into him with a dull, sickening weight. Sarah wasn't an anomaly, she was a signal. Lumiere had crossed a threshold quietly, invisibly, and now it was echoing its identity in ways he couldn't trace back to a single source. The questions his boss asked weren't born of curiosity, they were downstream effects. Somewhere in places he would never see and systems he would never access, Lumiere's absence was being noticed again and again, and this kind of void attracted attention from people whose entire purpose was to fill it, control it, or weaponize it. Sarah had simply been the first to speak plainly enough for him to recognize the threat. What unsettled him most was the variety of pressure, not its intensity. There were no ultimatums yet, no overt threats, just interest, inquiries, gentle proximity. Different faces, different accents, different justifications, all orbiting the same unseen center. Some hid behind corporate language, others behind national security, others behind the promise of help. He understood now that Lumiere wasn't being hunted by one power, but by many, each convinced it deserved access more than the rest. And unlike his fight for Max, this was a game played in silence where no one announced their moves. Sarah had made an offer, others would follow eventually. And every one of them would believe they were reasonable, right up until he said no.